Hello, my name is Kyle Suggs, and this is my channel where we take culture, TV, and movies, and we filter it right. We're going to talk a little bit about culture today and a little bit of politics here, because this video is going to be a deep dive into the transformation of the South from a Democrat stronghold into a Republican stronghold in only 30 to 40 years. And this is interesting because I've been doing a lot of diving on this, and this is part of a bigger video that I'm doing that this will release when that video comes out. It's going to be my walkaway number 4 video about the Southern strategy and how that's a myth. Now, before you say anything, I know you'll say, Kyle, what do you mean it's a myth? Everyone knows it's the Southern strategy, the way the Democrats have revisioned it in their history telling, is an absolute myth. And the claim that they make is that the Republican Party targeted racist whites to expand their base in the South to win because they were tired of losing elections. Well, that in and of itself is on a debate, even from a leftist standpoint. There are debates on that altogether. But I'm going to show particularly the arguments that have been put out on YouTube on that basis alone, on the fact that people like Atwater, who is a strategist, consultant, who was he was a fireball. And I'm not here to defend his tactics because I don't really know him. I just know he was a go-getter. He passed away, I think, in 2001, I believe. But the deal with him is that he had an infamous quote where he uses the N-word 6 times, and that quote is being used all over the place. And so in my diving in on this, I wanted to find out more about it. And so what I'm going to do quickly is the tape is about 41 minutes long, and I want to get to that. I'm going to keep this at about an hour if I can. So I'm going to try and quickly get through this preliminary part to give you some setup. Okay. So, Atwater was working for George H.W. Bush and also Reagan. He was a South Carolinian who was a go-getter. He was brought into the campaign and ran the Reagan campaign against Carter. And so this interview is in 1981, and he is interviewed by a guy named Leftist. This gentleman right here. And that's his family. That's his widow. He passed away a few years back. And so this guy here interviewed Atwater to basically talk about the Southern politics and how things happen. And Atwater was very candid in his talk. And I'm going to try and break it down because we'll get to that in a second. But he talks to him about how it was with politics in the 50s and how it was race-driven, and how when it got to the 70s, late 70s, race became less of an issue, that the cornerstone of the core of the South that both sides wanted, both Democrats and Republicans wanted, they wanted the blue-collar vote. And he went on to say that at the time, issues like the Voter Right Act and civil rights in general was a hotbed in the South, and that to keep the South, you pretty much had to maintain that in terms of your verbiage. But going further, that became less of an issue as people adapted to the change. It was becoming less frightening, and so the top issues became defense, cutting taxes, the budget, fiscal conservatism, and so forth. And that you no longer had to pander to people who are scared of change and may be racist. And so when he was given this quote, I'll explain why I felt he did that way, which I'm not condoning his verbiage. But at the same time, he's a political strategist. And both sides wanted the vote in the South. The Democrats wanted it, and the Republicans wanted it. President Carter, who was at the time the incumbent, had the Southern vote in the bag. According to Atwater, you'll hear later, he says that the Carter administration, the Carter campaign, did not stick to their messaging. They went off cuff. They got unfocused. And what Reagan did was he went in and gave his message that he'd been giving since 1964. Like I said, strong defense, budgeting, cutting costs, fiscal conservatives, balancing the budget, and cutting taxes. And so that was his message. And so it was a campaign strategy within the Reagan administration. So in his quote, when he says Southern strategy, it is not dealing with the overall Southern strategy that the Democrats are painting it as. The Democrats are painting it as, their claim is that the Republicans were targeting white racists. Well, according to Atwater, even though he uses the term Southern strategy, he's talking about winning the Southern strategy with his campaign. He's not talking about the overall campaign. Now, he does mention Dent about the campaign that they started Southern strategy. But then Pat Buchanan, who under Nixon as well, wrote a letter to them stating the purpose for the Southern strategy, and that was to basically let racial injustice die on the vine. That we're going to target national defense, the same thing that Atwater said, cutting taxes, conservatism, and we're going to focus on that route and let everybody else who are racist, the Wallaces and so forth, the Mahonies, to let those guys, die off. And that was the strategy that he did with Nixon, and that relates to what Atwater says, in terms of the big picture. Now, Atwater is very brash. He says things that are off the cuff. This was a off the record statement. Again, I'm not defending the guy, because from my research with him, he was ruthless. He was a political Napoleon. I mean, he was like cutthroat. And so, but again, to say that that's only on one side is unfair, because you can look at Jimmy Carter, his campaign, and things that he did in his campaign was just as ruthless. Whenever you have your first rally at the headquarters, not the headquarters, but it was the headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan, who actually had a rally that day. We have Carter, I have some articles here, where he was quoted as saying the N-word many, many, many times, and butting up to Southern racist whites in the South. I mean, he's a Georgia governor. So is that hard to believe? And so I'm not getting into these personal conflicts between Republican and Democrat in this situation, because people are trying to win campaigns and things happen. But the point of the picture at the whole political party of the Republican Party, they were targeting, white racists to flip the South, just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. There's a book here called The End of Southern Exceptionalism. It's a fantastic book. It basically goes out and breaks the myth that was the case. Even if you look at the biased Wikipedia on the Southern strategy, I read this article here. It gets in here and it tells you one thing, but then down here it tells you that scholars generally empathize on the role of racial backlash in the realignment of the Southern voters. There's a viewpoint that electoral realignment of the Republican Party is due to race-driven strategy, known as the top-down. And then there's also a suburban-centered vision reveals the demographics change played a more of an important role than a racial demography. So there are various aspects to this. It's not just a cut and dry thing. I think both sides are trying to use it as whatever. But there's more evidence on the Republican side, in my opinion, from what I've seen, to support their claim that it was a demographic deal. When you saw Eisenhower winning the peripheral states, how the Deep South stayed blue for many, many years, and how as the South became less racist in general, it became more Republican. That's a direct correlation to that. How the South became more less agricultural, how it became more urban, and more populous areas were coming up. People were moving in. It became people were attracted to the new opportunities of the Republican Party, the ideas of patriotism, national defense, the whole nine. Remember, we're still in the Cold War here, and so that's important for people. And so I'm just keep all that in mind. I'm going to go through this tape a little bit. I'm going to go through some things here. I'm going to try to stop it when I think it's getting to be, when I think their points come up. But I will say this real quick. I'm going to do something really quick here, because there's a misquote here in Wikipedia that really is, they misquote the actual quote. I'll bring it up when it happens. So I'm going to play the tape now, and I'm going to mute my phone, and I'm going to be doing stuff on the other side. But listen to that. When things happen, I'll jump in. And so let's kick this thing off. So again, just let me let you know, the person speaking, there's two people interviewing. There's a guy named Alexander Lamas, and then there's another interviewer who they're not sure who it is. I think his name is Saul. They're not sure who he is. They can't confirm it. Oh, by the way, just so you get a little backstory here, this came out in 1981, and so in the clip, he actually asks him to go off the record. He says, "Don't quote me on this." And so Lamas does not do that. He passes after Atwater passes away. He republishes the article with his name in it, and then the author, Lamas, passes away. And his wife here, who's an Obama supporter, was confronted by a guy named James Carter IV, who was mad about the Mitt Romney 47% comment. So he wanted to clear some things up. He found out that Lamas passed away. He knew about the tapes. He asked her for permission to play them and to have them. She gave it to him that night, and then it goes out. But if you notice, this quote, they only really do they show the question that came into it. And when that happens, I'll actually jump in and do that. So that's the setup, and let's get out of here and let's play it.
Well, I think to answer that question, Saul, you have to analyze the nature of Southern politics since the 1950s. What you had in the 1940s is basically, I think Southern politics began in VOT's book. What he did was analyze the Democratic Party, because you didn't have a Republican Party. He basically came up with the idea with parties are very factionalized. He came up with three different types of state parties. It was all within a democratic framework, and it was all personality, cult-oriented type things. Race was not really an issue. Race didn't become an issue in the South again until 1954. Race could become an issue if someone happened to be soft on the issue, but no one was. So everyone was operating within the framework of a segregated society, so race never became an issue. Obviously, from 1954 to 1966, that 12-year period, race was the issue. And you can analyze, Earl Black wrote a book called Southern Governors and Civil Rights. There hadn't been a comprehensive book written like Key wrote, but Southern Governors and Civil Rights analyzes that period pretty good. And basically what he came up with is the segregation candidate. The candidate who best handled the segregation issue between 54 and 66 basically was the winner. But importantly, the race question was the issue in all Southern races. This continued up to 70. Now, once you had the Voting Rights Act in 64 and 65, by 66, blacks were participating enough in the system where by 70 was the first year. Race was still the dominant issue, but the candidate, but moderates were consistently winning primaries by 70 because you had a large number of blacks. in '70s a good year to use because that's you had Jimmy Carter, you had Dale Bumpers, you had Reuben Askew, you had Bill Brock, you had John West. Across the board, that was a new breed of Southern politicians. To some extent, because they were image guys and media was being used, but more importantly, that was the first year statistically that blacks were participating enough to where a moderate would get through the primary.
That was also the year that Carter ran against Sanders losing votes.
66 Carter ran against Sanders. 66. Carter, by the way, is an interesting phenomenon. Most people don't know this, but you can get acetate. Carter ran a race against Sanders. No, wait a minute. Let me think of the Carter thing. Carter ran first against Lester Maddox.
Yeah, the Sanders thing, you said.
Yeah, the Sanders thing, you're right. That's when he did the baseball pictures and all that. But that was that was not overt racism and so forth. But he was doing that in a Democratic primary, positioned himself to come back in the general election as the moderate against Hal Super conservative. But by the way, just as a point of reference, what Carter did was go out in '66 and run as the moderate candidate against Lester and lost, and then used the Lester-Maddox formula, the same formula Maddox used.
That was also true of George Corleone.
Oh, sure.
When he first ran.
Well, his famous, I ain't going to be out niggerous there.
All right, go ahead.
But the point I'm making is race was the dominant issue in Southern politics, all through the 50s, the 60s. The 70s began two things, really. Competitive two parties. 60s, you had the Goldwater phenomenon, and you had Nixon and so forth. But basically, the 70s is when you had a crystallized two-party thing beginning. So in 1980, I think the crucial thing in 1980 is, number one, the two dominant issues in Southern politics, which had been race and party, meaning you have to be a Democrat to win, it pretty well dissolved. And the main issues became the economy and national defense. Now, that's interesting in that those are the issues, basically, that Goldwater. In other words, the South in 1964 was considered reactionary, Neanderthalic, and so forth, because we weren't mainstream on not only on the race thing, but on the economic issues and national defense and all. We were considered, ultra conservative and everything. What happens is a guy like Reagan, who campaigns in 1980 on a 1964 Goldwater platform, minus the boo-boos and obviously the Voting Rights Act, TVA, and all that bullshit. But when you look at the economics and the national defense, what had happened is that the South went from being behind the times to being the mainstream.
So did you catch that? So I'm going to jump in here real quick. So what Atwater is saying is that the hot topics or the interests of the people were moving more towards less away from race and into issues like the economy, jobs, budget, national defense. And he was saying that Goldwater, he wasn't really big on a lot of the civil rights issues because he was going it from a libertarian standpoint. And that's the best way to look at Goldwater, as a libertarian. And so he was looking at it from a constructionist constitution aspect of it. He had problems in that regard. Not because he was a racist, but because he just had this constitutional aspect of it. Less government. And because that, so Reagan basically ran on that platform. What Reagan ran on. National defense, cutting the budget, and growing the economy. And so he was saying that now the Republican Party is ahead of the time based on what it was prior to. And that's important to remember.
So what you had was two things happening that totally washed away the Southern strategy, this Harry Dent type Southern strategy, and that is that whole strategy was based, although it was more sophisticated than a Bilbo or a George Wallace, it was nevertheless based on coded racism. The whole thing. busing. We want a Supreme Court judge that won't have busing. Anything you look at could be traced back to the issue in the old Southern strategy. Now, it was not done in a blatantly discriminatory way, but the Reagans did not have to do a Southern strategy for two reasons. Number one, race was not a dominant issue. And number two, the mainstream issues in this campaign had been, quote, Southern issues since way back in the 60s. So Reagan goes out and campaigns on the economics and on national defense. The whole campaign was devoid of any kind of racism, any kind of reference. And I'll tell you another thing y'all need to think about that's even surprised me, is the lack of interest, really, a lack of knowledge right now in the South among white voters on this Voting Rights Act. I brought all these Republican state chairmen up here to just kind of soothe them down and say, look, before we had this meeting, look, we may not do exactly what y'all like. And what I found out about is all of them were very passive. They said, we'll pretty well go along with whatever you want. And I've looked at polls in the last 4 or 5 months, and there's just no interest or no intensity in that thing among white voters. Now,
sorry, I had it on mute. So that was a lot there. So basically what he was saying was that the old Southern strategy that he was calling, and again, this is, a campaign deal here, was he did say coded messaging, whatever, because they were trying their best to appeal to a broader base of people. But it wasn't discriminatory. It was just what you had to do because people's reactions to change and so forth was that they simply just had to, go along with it. Not that they were necessarily racist, but simply because they were abject to change. And so, but then when things started changing, evolving more, people didn't care as much anymore. It was like, whatever, it's not a big deal anymore. And I think he mentions it later on. You'll hear he talks about how people evolve. It's to change themselves. It's not necessarily the, when you have something that you're fearful of that's not there, that's what's going on. So, and I ran 2 campaigns. And the thing about campaigns are, and anyone who could tell you this, is that you have to funnel people in. You target your audience, so you're going to grab people you want, and you're going to throw out who you don't. And so that's just the nature of campaigns. That's with anything. And so when you say, coded messaging based on racial deals, it's because the issues at the time were racial issues. And so that's just the way it was. But again, as people evolved more and got more, enlightened, more or less, and smarter, then they realized that it was not that big a deal. And so when they start talking about the Voting Rights Act, he says, he comes in there to try and tell them, hey guys, listen, we may not be able to do this what you want. They're like, no, it doesn't matter. We don't care because it's not an issue. We care about the things we care about. And that's, again, the country, national security, low budget, cutting taxes, and so forth.
that in 1969, me bringing up, or Harry Dent, rather than me, bringing up those Southerners would have been a very big reported thing. The Southerners would have come up here with some kind of manifesto. That would have been a big, major news story, ongoing and all that
I'm
shit.
just wondering, though, how much residual there is. Okay, so there's no race, but there is busing as an issue. Busing. The president has made it a bit of an issue.
Okay, let's talk about what an issue is. So when I talk about an issue, I say I'm a pollster, okay? I ask an open-ended question. What's the biggest issue facing you today? You poll 600 people, and then you put on a continuum. 45 to 55% will say economics. 12% will say national defense. Busing was not even registered on the top 10. On an aggregate, busing hadn't been on the top 10 of open-ended issue questions in any poll I've seen since 1972. And it's gone. And now it's gone. No. Excuse me, Saul. I don't know why. It's gone. It's been on the top 10, but it hadn't been a top 10. And by 1978 to 1980, busing hadn't even been a top 10 issue. So, sure, everything's an issue. What I'm saying is
I'm just wondering how much residual there is. that called racism in the anti-government, anti-Washington, states' rights, return to states' rights, defederalize, how much there is in the old days, the residual of the old days there is in the antipathy towards welfare programs, poverty programs, which are, after all, on blacks.
Fine.
And other political, social, economic programs which do give power to black folks or poor folks or identify with giving power. But again, it's not purely Southern, but the legal service.
You see how the interviewer said, welfare programs for blacks? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, man. Liberals want to say that blacks are the only ones getting welfare. The whole thing with the 47%, that wasn't, blacks are only 13% of the population. And so people need to think, do the math. And the question is leading him in to say, hey, well, how's it going to hurt, how's it going to hurt blacks? Well, blacks were the only ones on welfare.
They give problems to the municipalities of Mississippi who want to gerrymander. Those kind of. I'm just wondering.
Well, sure, okay, but I think this, and don't get me wrong. You go out to these white country clubs, and they're still going to sit out there and say, well, shit, I'm tired of, I'm tired of getting everything and all that. But the bottom line is don't give those out yet. I got to look at it. The bottom line is it's a mainstream thing now, and it's not grounded in racism as much as it kind of the network movie syndrome. I'm mad as hell and I ain't gonna take it. Now, statistically, your poor people and the people receiving all these things are blacks. Now, some of the Southern stuff may still be racism, but it's such a widespread thing now, I think it's almost developing into a class struggle type issue rather than a racism issue.
When you say widespread, you mean national?
I mean, I can go to a country club. I won't go to a country club. Hello? Okay. Hey, baby. Fine, what's up? But what I'm saying is you can sit in a cocktail anywhere and they'll start saying, well, I'm tired of these fuckers getting welfare.
Anywhere in the country,
yeah. And if it were white, it wouldn't make any difference. There's always going to be a certain, I'll say this, my generation, my generation, will be the first generation of Southerners that won't be prejudiced. Totally. I mean, hello? Well, y'all leave me alone. In other words, my parents and even people 5 and 10 years older than me were touched with things that were beat into me in another period. But what I'm saying is that has really been sublimated by a bunch of other issues. But more importantly, is people in the South are just like any people in the history of the world. Once something becomes a reality, people adapt to it. We fought, we kicked, we struggled with all of these problems, first in 54 and then the voting rights stuff in 64. But by 70s, it was a reality. And you just adapt to reality and move on. So I'm not saying that it was done down there because we thought it was great or we finally understood or anything. It became a part of our life. So in these 80 elections, so when I'm saying back to our Southern strategy, so the Southern strategy now, basically, and here's another thing, Saul, you and I talked about this, is who controls.
So he's about to get into the whole big comment here, and I want to say this real quickly. So he's basically saying he's got a wide-eyed look at this, whereas he's thinking that people are going to evolve and get out of this prejudice thing, that this is going to be the first generation of Southerners that aren't going to be prejudiced. And I think he mentions again, like I said before, how he talks about how after a while people just adapt and they move on. And that's his take. And so we'll move forward here, but I just want to make sure that's what he's saying. And people will argue and say, well, he didn't really mean it, whatever, he didn't mean that, whatever. He's covering for himself or trying to reinvent history. well, the man's passed away, he's gone, and so I'm taking this for what it is. You know, who knows if he meant what he said, but we had to take what he said and match it against what happened with reality, and I think we can do that.
Elections in the South, statewide elections in the South are controlled by, if you want to use the term, George Wallace voters. Because statistically, blacks went for John F. Kennedy in mass, they went for Johnson in mass, they went for Humphrey in mass, they went for Carter in mass, and they went for Carter in mass, and McGovern in mass, all six. The country club whites went for the Republican every time in mass. So, the blue-collar voter in 1964 goes for Goldwater. He carries the deep South. Remember, the other two groups went the same way. 1968, the blue-collar voter goes for George Wallace. He carries the South, deep South. 1972, he goes for Nixon. 1976, he goes for Carter. Now, we're leading up to my whole strategy in the Deep South in 1980, which I discussed with you. In other words, the whole focus group in the South is that blue-collar worker. Now, that's important when you tie it back into the racist thing, because he was also the guy who was most threatened by the black, and was also most prone to be, quote, a racist. And until 1980, and a little bit in 1976, you know, the race issue is how you approach that program. Plus, the most conservative guy on fiscal matters always got his vote, and the toughest son of a bitch in national defense and foreign policy always got his vote. So, what happened is Jimmy Carter in 76 was able, plus these people, regional pride is always biggest with the lower intellects and lower income groups. So, on the basis of regional pride, I'm one of you, and fuzzing the issues and making it look like, well, being a born-again Christian, which smacks of conservatism and trying to be conservative, he gets that group in mass in 76, carries the whole South. Well, once he got there, and this is an important point of what I was saying, it was his to lose. It wasn't ours to win; it was Carter's to lose.
Okay, did you catch that? If you're a political junkie or a political wonk, this is really interesting, and this tells you everything why the Southern strategy is a myth, and that you can't use this. You cannot use this particular interview to say that the Republican Party looked after solely for white races. He debunks it right there, and I'm gonna just go through it here, and I took some notes here because I heard this before, but I want to say it correctly again when I say this. So what he was saying was that, I have my notes here somewhere. Let me find them. Hold on. Okay, here we go. All right, so he initially talked about the African American vote, the black vote, how they went for Carter, for JFK, for Humphrey, for McGovern, and so forth, and how this is the two factions, okay? And the other one, the country club whites, went for the Republicans all the way, you know. But then he said, this is what's most important. He said there's the blue collar worker. He said that went for Goldwater in 94 and in 97. I think I missed that one. Let me see. Sorry about that. I'm just 94. I forgot 68. I think that was Wallace. Okay, Wallace. Okay, so it's 94 was Goldwater, who was Republican. 76 was Wallace. We know about him. And 72, I missed that. Nixon, I believe. Yeah, Nixon. Okay. 76 was Carter. And 80, this is what, in 80 is going to be Reagan, okay? So then he stops there. He says, let me go back again. So there's three factions. African Americans in the South, they went for JFK, Carter, Humphrey, McGovern, and so forth. Country Club whites all went for the Republicans. All right? Then you had the blue collar, which is what everyone wanted to get. And then he goes on to say, and that went to Goldwater, Wallace, Nixon, Carter in 76, and then I'm going to say this, what he's going to say, so you'll know. the blue collar vote, he said, he was basically, this is what he said, that they were the less intellectual, that they're the more people who would typically be racist. He said, but that's the vote you wanted to get. So it's the blue collar vote they were going for. They weren't going for the white racists. They were going for the blue collar voter, some of which probably are racist. Okay, but it just so happens that their values lined up with the conservative values in terms of, again, national defense, country, budget, economics, paying taxes, the whole nine. And also, not only that, it also in terms of national pride, patriotism, regional pride. And that's what he said, that Jimmy Carter would do that. He would act like I'm one of you guys, I'm Johnny-go-lucky, whatever, ho-ho, I'm one of yours. Born-again Christian, that tended to go over well. And that he was, I missed the other part of it. Okay, but that was part of it. So the blue-collar vote, Jimmy Carter went after that, and he won it in 76. Let's see what happens after that. This is very interesting. Check this out.
All Carter had to do was run the place. Well, he didn't do that. He took that for granted. He went out, didn't stay on the issue, and we were able to go back in, which I didn't think we were going to be. I thought we could really raid him and hamstring and bring him back in there. But what he did is default is on turf, not on anything to do with racism or the race question, but on economics and on national defense. It was his to lose. So the fact of the matter is, the South is Reagan's to lose now. And as long as, if Reagan goes and denounces his own economic policy, or doesn't balance the budget, or he could lose the South. But if not, he's going to get the South.
But he's not going to lose the South if he goes along with what the blacks want in voting rights, is what you're saying.
That should be a thrust of his. In other words, in 1968, the whole Southern strategy that hearing was put together, the Voting Rights Act would have been a central part of keeping the South. Now they don't have to do that. All you got to do to keep the South is for Reagan to run the place on the issues he's campaigned on since 1964. And that's fiscal conservative, balancing the budget, cutting taxes, the whole cluster, and being tough on national defense.
So in this clip, essentially, in 1980, Carter was not able to hold on to the blue-collar vote. Why? Because he got off message, he got distracted, and it wasn't, like Atwater was saying, racially motivated. It was just that he was unfocused, giving Reagan the opportunity to jump in there and grab that blue-collar vote. Okay? Again, the blue-collar vote, as they mentioned before, they looked at regionalists as like my territory. They were very territorial. They were very patriotic. They were less intellectual, I'm saying. And a lot of them, as Atwater said, were racist people. But they were a big group. And you can't discriminate who was the racist, who weren't. You want to get votes. You're trying to win an election. And if that's shocking for someone to know, that's what campaigns do. That's what it is. And there's really no way around it. You're going to have people that you don't like vote for you. And that's just the way it is. And so then the interviewer said, Lamus, or it could have been, Lamus basically said, so you mean to tell me that if Reagan went along with the Voter Rights Act, that he was good? And Atwater said that should have been his focus. Had it been 68 when we did this back then that definitely would have been something that we would have gone after, because based on what he said earlier, race was a focal point back then. It was a big thing. And so, but now it's not. You can focus on just the issues of, like I said before, I'm going to say this about 100 times this rest of this interview, national defense, cutting the budget, paying taxes. Okay? And so let's jump ahead. I'm going to jump back to about 15. I'll go back a little bit so you hear the rest of it. I'll go back a little bit.
Issue, and and we were able to go back in, which I didn't think we were going to be. I thought we could really rate him and hamstring and bring him back in there. But what he did is default is on turf, not on anything to do with racism or the race question, but on economics and on national defense. It was his to lose. So the fact of the matter is, the South is Reagan's to lose now. And as long as if Reagan goes and denounces his own economic policy, or doesn't balance the budget, or he could lose the South. But if not, he's going to get the South.
But he's not going to lose the South if he goes along with what the blacks want in voting rights.
That should be a thrust of his. In other words, in 1968, the whole Southern strategy that hearing was put together, the Voting Rights Act would have been a central part of keeping the South. Now they don't have to do that. All you got to do to keep the South is for Reagan to run in place on the issues he's campaigned on since 1964. And that's fiscal conservative, balancing the budget, cutting taxes, the whole cluster, and being tough on national defense. And it's going to be very hard for Reagan to...
And see, here's the thing. If you hear that in just on a little snippet and not hear the whole context of the blue collarness and how the votes went from each year, how it was segregated between country club people and African Americans and the blue collars, and you didn't know how polling was going on before that, the context behind all that, you would have think that this is the most racist thing ever. And that's what they're counting on. They're counting on people like me who not to go out and actually research this stuff. Again, I'm not defending Atwater, but because he was a cutthroat kind of guy, and I don't know him, and I'm not researching him. But that's not really the point. I want to take what he's saying, because it was hidden for so long, and to see if it holds up with history, and it holds up with basic campaign strategy, and does it tie directly to an overall conspiracy of the GOP to target racist whites? And I'm not seeing it. So here goes the quote. We're getting to the quote right now. I'm going to play it in its entirety, and we're going to talk about it.
I'm not saying that he does this consciously, but the fact is that he does get to the Wallace voter and to the racist side of the Wallace voter by doing away with legal services, by doing away with by cutting down on food stamps.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not. Is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all want to quote me. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Okay, now this is what I want to jump into. We're going to dive into this a little bit. I actually may cut this whole thing short because this is really the crux of it, and there's not much at the end of this. I may just, because we're getting a little bit long on this, but I'll leave a link to where you can listen to the whole rest of it. I don't have any more comments pretty much after this quote, because this is really the crux that everybody uses, okay? And so I think there's enough context to kind of dive into it. So let's break this thing down, all right? So, okay, so the first thing he says, we have to take everything into context of what he said, okay, prior to. I'll do a quick recap. Okay, so before 1950, things weren't very racial in terms of motivation. People were segregated, whatever. So people were in their own little cliques. Once civil rights started, race became more of an issue because there was change was happening and they were freaking out, whatever. And their racists get pissed off as well. Okay. And so at some point in time, they started doing polling, which said that busing, which is a big racial issue, was no longer being an issue at all, not even in the top 10. It was national defense, it was the budget, cutting taxes, overall fiscal conservatism. So from a campaign strategy, you're going to target people in those categories. Those people's categories, period. If you're a campaign manager, that's what you're going to do. All right? Bar none. It just so happens the three factions, one of the biggest ones is the blue collar. And unfortunately, a lot of those people are racist. But you got to win the election. So what do? Do you give up? Or do you target the overall message, which is better than the busing, the all the other racial crap that was resonating before? Or do you target real issues that are going to help Americans? And hopefully, like you were saying before, people will evolve and become better. They'll adapt to it, become less racist, less prejudiced. Okay, and we will get rid of that racial problem altogether. He mentions that twice. He says we'll get rid of that racial problem. You won't have the need to do that. And the N-word was pretty much that's a bad thing in terms of a contextual historical thing. It was a bad thing to say at the time. He was off record and he got loose and whatever. He said what he said. But he mentioned initially he said, I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, which leads me to believe that he was getting into the mind of these people, these blue collar, low IQ voters, by his own terminology earlier. I'm not saying this to people today. I'm just saying this. He said that this is what he considers them: low IQ, low intelligent, less sophisticated workers. That was his words in this. I'm using those words. Nobody get offended on that. I'm not saying that. Okay. So, and so in doing so, he was using those terms in a very derogatory term. I definitely admit that. But to say that from their perspective, they're looking at these terms like busing and all these different terms that would be triggering them to want them to vote. But because in their other side of themselves, outside the racism, the other side of their whatever they have, the nuances, they also have other categories that they like as well. The national defense, budgeting, and all that stuff. That applied to them too. And that was palatable because that in combination with the fact that things were changing and they were getting used to it, they were adapting, then that's going to be palatable. And that's how Reagan was able to go in and do that. And so it's easy for someone to come in and say, hey, they're just targeting the races. Well, the way he explains it, it's a logical progression in terms of a strategy to actually gain over a public that is totally backwards in their thinking. Okay? And so it is what it is. Campaign politics is not it's not for the faint of heart, guys. It really is not. And I don't like all of it either, but this was not a targeted effort by the Republican Party to target racist whites. That's just ludicrous. In fact, that probably would be even been a minority. And I don't think the majority of the white people in the South were racist. I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that at all. Because if that was the case, we'd still be having segregation today. If that was the case, I think the human spirit can get above beyond that. Can get above that. And I think Atwater had that sort of feeling too. He seemed to be pretty optimistic when he was saying. But also, I want to say something here. I want to show you something really quickly of how dishonest the WikiLeaks is. In this particular WikiLeaks, I'm sorry, Wikipedia. So in this particular article, this is the quote. It's all misquoted. All you hear is misquoted. He never says Harvey Dent Jr. I guess they tagged him, so I guess that's okay. But this was misquoted in here. But down here it says the backbone. He did not say backbone. He said back burner. I know that because I heard it. And number two, it's also here on this other page here. He did not say backbone. Backbone means the crux, the hub, the main part. And so that is misleading. Makes you think that race is going to be that we're going to be dealing with race on the backbone. No, on the back burner, meaning he wants to get rid of it. That he was hoping that would go away. That we won't need it anymore. He says that in that quote. And so, that's what you're dealing with here with this dishonesty. And as I kept digging in more and more in this stuff, I dig into more articles. This was kind of debunking a lot of that. But, it was really, I had to actually go to the actual documents themselves because there's an article that said that Reagan actually, if I can find it here. Let me see if I can find it. Where is it? There was an article that basically said that Reagan started his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the home of a area where there was a civil rights people who were killed. Didn't happen. It was 9 months later, and it was he did his actual announcement via TV. And so this article here, and I'll leave all these articles in the description so you can check them out for yourself. But yeah, so there's just so much stuff that's just inaccurate that it's almost hard for me to even deal with it. So I'm trying to go for actual source materials and go with that because that's the only way you can really, really deal with it. In the actual audio recording, I went in, I changed the normalization, I equalized it, I cut out the background noise, bumped up the volume a little bit so you can hear it better. Because the original tape is not really clear to hear, but I will leave a link to that. In fact, even this particular video here just has this one clip here. Doesn't have any context, doesn't tell you anything about what's going on. It just looks bad. You see the N word 6 times, and there you go. Okay, obviously he's a racist. And so, you gotta research, guys. You gotta research. He was off the record. So should he have said it? Yeah, probably not. But do we say things off the record that we shouldn't say? Of course. And so, but the important thing is 2 things. One, in the context of what he said, it was absolutely made sense in what he was saying in terms of the numbers that he was laying out, the polling, and everything else. It made perfect sense there at face value. And secondly, it does not tie directly into this vast wing conspiracy to target racist whites. Didn't make any sense. Doesn't make sense here. Doesn't make sense in this particular article. In this particular interview either. So we'll go a little further. I'm not going to go much further. I'll keep it just about an hour right now, but I'm going to go a little bit further to see what else we can hear him say. I apologize for the jumpiness here, but this is going to be a video that I'm going to attach to my other video. And so the good thing about that is that I'll add it as a card, so I'll be able to change this video around and make it better quality. But I want to have something at launch this weekend, so I have something to put up there for people to see and dig into.
We have a great story that was told in one of the biographies of Huey Long. Huey went to a Catholic hospital, which had been a target of the racists down there because there were white folks working on blacks, white nurses working on black patients. It was also, he had promised lots of blacks more jobs and upgrading jobs when he was running for election. So he went to the hospital one day and just raised hell about all them white people working on blacks. And why didn't they get some more blacks in the place? Work on blacks rather than have these clean and looking white nurses working on blacks. So he satisfied both constituents. Let blacks more jobs, get away with money.
Yeah, and Huey Long, the interesting thing, he was the only single one of those guys. You can always find some traces of that stuff. Consistently didn't use the race relation.
Well, he used it, but then turned it around to himself.
Yeah, but I'm talking about when you look at whoever Vardaman and all these guys.
What about this thing that you read?
I don't want to show you that shit because I'm not satisfied with it. That answers the question.
Yeah, that answers the question. Okay, good enough.
Is that all you?
That's all I think.
You doing all right?
I'm doing fine. How about you? We never did get to the barbecue.
Okay, that looks like that's about. They're talking personal stuff there. So okay, so that was the interview with Lemus and Lee Atwater. Lee Atwater passed away at 40 years old. He had a brain tumor, and so we don't know. We will never know really what his thoughts really were on that. But based on the way he framed it, the way he said it, again, I'm not excusing the language at the same time, but it is what it is. But again, it's not something that's going to be, to me, evidence to pin as a global conspiracy on the Republican Party, especially considering how there are contrasting opinions on what happened anyway. You look at the liberal media; they're saying, "Okay, it happened this way. That the Republicans did it because the Republicans were losing elections, and the Democrats were upset that they were the racists were upset because of the civil rights agreements that the Democrats jumped on board, which is ridiculous. The Democrats didn't jump on board anything. They were against the civil rights movement from the very beginning. They filibustered the mess out of it. And so I don't know where they're getting that from. And I saw that in an article. I think it was the Washington Post, I believe. And and they're saying that's the reason, and that there was a vacuum being created, and that the Republicans jumped in there and grabbed that vacancy. Well, if you add that in with the actual evidence with the method of Southern exceptionalism here, this guy here, or the end of not this one, the other one. This one here. It's a great book. If you get a chance, check it out. And this right here, this guy here totally just lays out the case for the demographics, urban sprawl, the fact that the Florida states like Florida, outside, not the Mississippi, Alabama, but the outskirts where things were becoming more industrialized, younger, less racist, that people were looking for opportunity, and they were flocking to the Republican Party, also because they're really embarrassed about the Democrats, what they're doing. Keeping schools shut down for a year because they don't want to have black kids in their school. Just the racism outright, and the civil rights movement in general was just a stain on society, and people had enough of that. People who had a heart for real change started to leave that plantation mentality and going over to the GOP for lots of reasons. And so that's what I had for this. This is going to be, again, attached to my video. And again, I apologize for lack of quality and my stammering and whatever and jumping around. But again, I want to have something here so you can hear it and with my analysis to it, because the video is going to be about 20 minutes long, and there's no way in the world I could cover this part of it and make it even sound remotely convincing in that minute of time without sounding like a pandering person. Because you really got to read this, listen to this whole thing all the way through, and understand what he's trying to say, and match it against the real data, against real political evidence and tendencies, and it makes perfect sense. So anyway, so with that, I'm going to jump off here. If you like the content on this channel where we take culture, TV, and movies, we filter right, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button and sharing with your friends. And please consider hitting one of these videos right here.